Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us for our webinar, The Business of Telework, Key Workplace Issues and Considerations. This is the second in a series of 4 webinars on teleworking during COVID-19. If you missed our first webinar, you can view it on our website at ctrides.com via the Telework section. These webinars were designed to build upon one another and address some of the questions and concerns we've been hearing from organizations like yours. My name is Russell McDermott, and I'm the Program Director for CT Rides. I'll also serve as one of today's presenters and moderator. I'm joined today by Elham Shirazi, who is the Principal of ePlanning and is a nationally recognized telework expert who has worked around the world with organizations of all sizes to develop, implement, and consult on their remote working practices. Elham has worked with me on the CT Rides program to provide these and other services to businesses throughout Connecticut. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules. All participants will be muted for the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A tab, and we will do our very best to answer them during the Q&A section at the end. I want to emphasize, no matter how small the question may be, we encourage you to ask it. We're all going through the same challenges, so odds are we all have similar questions. We're going to have a copy of this and all of our webinars available on our website, ctrides.com. Lastly, your feedback is extremely valuable to us. We try to customize all of our presentations and services based on the needs of our partners, so we would greatly appreciate it if you took the time to let us know how we did. You'll receive a copy of this survey, both in your browser at the end of the webinar and via email. So to get started, just a little bit about us at CT Rides. We are a program of the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and we offer services that helps employees find better commutes than driving alone to work. This helps to reduce traffic congestion and improves air quality in the state, which in turn helps businesses in Connecticut to be more productive and competitive, thus making the state a better place to live and work. CT Rides also provides expert advice and assistance to help companies develop on-site transportation demand management programs, which also include telework solutions. One of the best things about us is that there is no cost to companies in Connecticut to utilize our services. For today's webinar, we're going to be focusing specifically on our teleworking service, which include, among other things, HR, technology, and training consultant services. The question that I most frequently get is, what are some of our qualifications to provide such services? Normally, when you hear of a state DOT and teleworking, most people normally don't make the connection between the two. And one of the best kept secrets in the state of Connecticut that I think is that the state DOT was one of the first organizations in the country to not only offer teleworking support services, but also one of the first places to do it on a statewide level. The DOT, through its nationally recognized Transportation Demand Management Program, has been supporting telework for businesses in Connecticut since the mid-90s. And one of our specialties is actually the rapid deployment of business continuity solutions. And we, of course, have our famous winter weather to thank for honing those skills. For today's agenda, we will be focusing on the importance of structure and developing a sustainable, scalable framework for your remote work programs. While no two programs are the same, there are certain mechanisms that organizations can and should put in place to better position themselves for success. And while we're not lawyers and do not provide any legal or regulatory advice, we are going to point out some regulatory and legal considerations that companies should be aware of. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Elham Shirazi to discuss some of those best practices and strategies. Elham?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which allows you to bring some order to a lot of people teleworking. Based on some of the latest data I saw yesterday, over, I think, 80% of Americans right now are under a stay-at-home type of a rule. So it's no surprise that many organizations have had to ask people to work at home. However, we do want to bring it to your attention that this is not the wild, wild west as far as teleworking is concerned. And in fact, programs have been in place for over 30 years. And these programs have certain milestones and guidelines that have allowed employers to facilitate this type of an arrangement. So a lot of you may be in a position where you've had nothing written down before about what this arrangement is about. You might have tried it on an ad hoc basis, meaning if something came up for, for an employee, you allowed them to telework just, a day here or a day there, maybe because the plumber was coming, or they had to be home for a specific delivery, or maybe you were allowing it part-time. However, with a lot of organizations, it's not uncommon to find that although they've allowed 1 or 2 or 3 people to telework, that they still do not know that there is legality and there is actually, there are certain rules that need to be observed when teleworking is implemented. Believe me, there is a method to the madness. So the right direction to have as employers is to develop programs that allow for you as an employer to have business continuity during this pandemic crisis, and yet make sure that teleworking is implemented in a thoughtful way and in a well-planned manner. Are contracts, policies, or guidelines necessary? The answer is yes. You do need to have some guiding principles for the type of program that you have. Some organizations just have a small employee handbook with a page describing, every aspect of what arrangement is available. And some organizations have longer, more comprehensive handbooks that include a few pages of policy regarding every program that is available to employees. We are definitely in a good position to help you develop as simple language as is dictated by the type of employee handbook that you have, or a more comprehensive one. Why are these policies or guidelines necessary? One of them is to be safe and to make sure that we're protecting both sides of this, meaning that both employees and employers are protected in this type of an arrangement. The other reason that it would be necessary to have something in writing is to be able to accommodate larger numbers of people to telework, as opposed to one here and one there, where decision-making has been very subjective, and to be able to describe what are some eligibility criteria, what are some ideal attributes of a job being right, an employee being right, the technology working, and yes, to avoid legal pitfalls. And we'll glance at very quickly. Again, whatever program, guideline, policy you come up with, you do need to consult your attorneys. And we want these, these guidelines to be shared quite extensively so everybody knows the rules of the engagement. And we also want to make sure that if this solution works after the emergency disappears, that perhaps you can have a successful practice of teleworking. It may not be full-time, but something on a part-time basis, a day a week, 2 days a week, or as needed. There is a mixed experience amongst employers in terms of having a formalized versus an informal program. And by formalized, I mean, program that actually has the rules down. This data that I'm going to share with you has been collected by Zenefits, and they're a software company that provide cloud-based services for HR. Now, when we look at the universe of telework programs among the employers that they surveyed, what we can see is that something like maybe 40% of the employers have something in writing. And when we look at the rest, that means that actually a good 60% are unsure whether or not there's a policy, they have no policy, or there is no official policy or guideline, and the manager is just approving it on an ad hoc basis. So we know that you've had to get a teleworking arrangement up and ready, but keep in mind this program can grow and become better over time, and that's what we're hoping that will happen. So do not worry if you don't right away have a policy or a guideline. We're here to help you beyond this webinar to make sure that you develop some materials that can be shared. Now, what typically is involved in the program guidelines or policy? By the way, I use the term guidelines because sometimes organizations just shy away from calling something a policy. And they prefer to go with something that is called a guideline. So first and foremost, you do want to mention what are the goals of the program. I think in this era, obviously top of the line is going to be to respond to business continuity in the era of COVID-19. That's probably your number one goal. However, if you're looking for a program that's sustainable beyond COVID-19, we are going to go over some business reasons why your organization may want to consider teleworking beyond this era. Obviously, morale is going to be key after COVID-19 dies down. Work-life balance is still going to be an issue for employees and for employers. Recruitment and retention will still be issues, and we will go over these in a few slides. The other thing you want to include in your guideline is a description of what are the selection criteria, such as I mentioned, is the job right? Is the employee right? Are there eligibility criteria such as meets or hits above productivity for an employee to be considered? Is this program just for people who have company issued laptops and phones, or could people use their own equipment? The guidelines are also very specific in terms of the arrangement, saying sometimes this is only available, once a week, or they may say it's up to the individual manager to determine how often people can be teleworking. So frequency is mentioned, as well as scheduling issues. Sometimes these guidelines have a line or two on, a full department cannot telework on just one day, so that there's always coverage in the organization as far as teleworking is concerned. Obviously, the communication needs will be specified, such as, how often are employees, expected to, check their emails, their voicemails, and, some of these communication rules will go back to what you have in existence today. And obviously, workers' comp is also part of this, and home is an extension of work. So, injuries that happen that are work-related in the dedicated space for teleworking, which will be a topic of next week's webinar as to what is a designated workspace, could be considered workers' comp. Okay. The other, issues that are typically included in the guidelines are what are the available resources to the employee. Are they going to be able to, access the company's server through a VPN? Is it cloud-based? Or should they be working, as just a standalone, on a standalone computer and not be taking, work necessarily back and forth, into the office. Obviously, insurance is also important. In many cases, if an employee uses their equipment, then the employee is responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the equipment. And in cases where the employer is providing it, obviously, the employer will be responsible. As I mentioned in the prior slide, a designated workspace is important. It really does lend itself to having good practices where the employee's being ergonomic and, they're sitting in a correct position so that they don't hurt themselves when they're, working at home, and they have a good chair. And we also want to make sure that non-teleworkers' needs are not interrupted by an individual teleworking. So, making sure that emails, phone numbers are all available to everybody, as well as making sure that schedules are being communicated. So on, your Outlook or any kind of electronic schedule that is used, people can see, okay, so-and-so is not in the office, but it says they're teleworking, which means that they are available. So they can be called or they can be emailed. A telework agreement usually accompanies a policy or a guideline, and the purpose of the agreement is to tailor this arrangement down to the individual employee. We've got samples of these forms, and we'll be very happy to, again, share them with you for the purposes of your program. Very importantly, the teleworking location should be clear, meaning, there should be an address which says this is where the employee is going to be teleworking from. Another thing that's important, especially these days, is to indicate from what date to what date this agreement is going to be in place. So for your agreements today, it may say, that this agreement is in place, as of, March 23rd until further notice that COVID emergency is over. Or, if you have a program that is more advanced, you may want to, have a date that is later than maybe it's beyond the emergency. The hours of teleworking should be clear, and to the degree possible, you want to have an idea of what are the core hours that employees will be available for the purposes of teleworking during this crisis. And it's good to establish those with the employees up front. Obviously, situations are very fluid. Some people have younger children at home. Some people have to homeschool in this environment. So it's good to just have an idea, of when is a good time to do meetings, when are some times that you can be checking with the employee, obviously with the expectation that it's clear what kinds of assignments are being done, what equipment is being used. Is it the employees or is it employer sponsored? And then have some conditions about how often, as I mentioned before, they should be checking in with voicemail, with email, etc. So the following list includes some of the legalities that you should be considering for the purposes of your telework program. Are any of these a showstopper? Absolutely not. We have been implementing teleworking for a number of years, and I wanted to point out that the federal government has one of the largest teleworking programs in the United States. So basically, if the feds can do it, we can do it. None of these legalities have gotten in the way of implementing teleworking or have become litigious issues. So please do talk with your attorneys about what they are so you have the right language. What are some ideal steps that your organization may use to implement teleworking? And these are milestones that would have been in place probably over a period of a few months for you to get your program up and running. So many of you have been in a situation where you've had a COVID-19 steering committee that has made you, kind of pack in everything that's here on the slide very quickly into a week. However, it's important to have someone who is in command of the ship, meaning someone who does the housekeeping issues, someone who's, taking the information, making sure that it's all crafted and put into, a language that can be shared with the employees. And often, a lot of these programs do have an executive champion or management commitment. A steering committee is really necessary because teleworking not only, draws upon HR and human resources, but also draws upon your IT department. It draws upon risk assessment. It may draw upon facilities. And maybe some of the other departments that want to be experimenting this or piloting this. So that steering committee is really important in shaping what direction your employer will take in terms of what is allowed and not allowed, not only during COVID-19, but also beyond. One of the first things the steering committee does is develop policies and agreements, and we do have templates that we can share with you. Please do ask if you want to see some examples, and it can get your steering committee working from the first day to see if you can very quickly develop some language. Obviously, IT has to chime in terms of what the company can do and cannot do. Not everybody may have a company issued, laptop. Some people may use their own equipment. However, IT really rules, I would say, in this particular category, because they have to be comfortable with how people are going to, remote access, or come in and get the information, yet do it in a safe and secure manner. Training of the participants is critical. Last week we did some top of the line tips for managers. Obviously, employees are really important, and we're going to be doing some training for employees. However, if your organization wants us to do this, on a one-on-one basis, we'd be happy to, again, tailor something, around what your policies are, so that your managers and employees are a little bit more comfortable with how to telework. Costs and savings are critical, and we'll talk about some of the savings, but it's not unusual for an employer to have decided to invest in technology right away because of the emergency that's come up. But there's still a lot of employers that will, be allowing people to use their equipment. But the benefit of teleworking, the biggest advantage of teleworking is that there are also cost savings in place. Evaluation is critical. You can do this by talking to your employees, once a week, maybe even have a, employee meeting to go over what some issues are that have come up, to go over technology issues. And it's not bad to get managers also to get together to voice some of the issues that they've confronted, because in this biggest experiment with working remotely, we're going to have to pilot week after week to learn, how do we make it perfect. So I did mention the business case for teleworking, and I'm going to provide you with more data on the following slides regarding these. Typically, what employers have found is that if a program is developed carefully, meaning that there are selection criteria in place, and these are employees that have a good knowledge of what their job is, have the right skill level, and are productive already in the office, that the productivity may increase in a work at home situation. And ranges of 10 to 20% are not unusual at all. And this is due, as you can imagine, to the lack of distractions in a normal telework setting, where the employee is alone, when they're working at home, and there aren't other distractions. Your program also provides flexibility, around people's schedules, and helps with work and life, and really does make for happier employees. A lot of employers were implementing teleworking to improve recruitment and retention prior to COVID-19, to make sure that employees stay with the organization. As we know, the millennials job hop a lot, and they look for flexibility. So this was a necessity for keeping the younger employees. Morale typically goes up. People are happier when they can telework the day before they telework, the day of teleworking, and the day after teleworking. They're telling us that they're happier. Some employers have developed programs to save on their space usage, meaning overhead and parking. And there might be some desk sharing programs in place, or some employers have implemented a Schedule A or Schedule B, meaning some employees come to work one week and then they work at home the following week, and then so the other group obviously is in when the other group is out. And that has allowed companies to really, save. However, in a context of overhead savings, you always want to make sure that you have drop-in space available for employees that do have to come in. And, I think in the context of Connecticut commuters, we're seeing about, an hour saved a day round trip for people who can telework. And obviously the stress of commuting goes away. So as far as productivity, FlexJobs is an organization that actually conducts a lot of surveys of employees that are interested in productivity. Interested in flexibility, and they have about 3,000 employees that they surveyed in this particular survey in 2018, and 65% of the workers thought that they would be more productive at home than working in a traditional office environment. What I always tell employers is, as long as productivity stays the same, that's great. And if it increases, it's a positive byproduct. If it starts going down, then we need to assess whether that job, the employee, or the technology are not the right fit for that particular teleworking arrangement. In a normal setting, obviously, an employer always has a clause which says employees or the employer do reserve the right to opt out of teleworking at any time with or without reason. You may be wondering how productivity gets measured. I really like the results that the Society for Human Resource Management put out based on a survey they did, I think it was about 2016. And they asked managers to respond to how, what are the common methods that you use to gauge employee productivity while employees are, working remotely. And as you can see, almost 50% said they base it on the responsiveness of the employee, meaning getting back to emails, voicemails, considerations that are sent their way. About over 40% said it's through goals and parameters that they know this. They know also because the employees were reporting the progress they're making. So a lot is going back to are there goals, are there objectives, are there deliverables, and are those being met? And I did want to point out that a very small percentage of the employers said that they gauge productivity based on when an employee logs on and logs off. So even managers don't want to be in the business of, having to look at when people logged on and when people logged off, and they're more concerned with what happens in that day that people are teleworking. So a few other findings, and this is from Flex Jobs, that the top reasons people do want flexible work are, as you can see, some of the reasons cited here, like work-life, family demands, time savings, commuting stress. 97% of the respondents were interested in being a flexible worker. 61% of people who responded to the 2018 survey said that they have left or considered leaving a job due to the lack of flexibility, and 22% more were teleworking in 2018 compared to 2017. Another question that typically comes up is, what should employers be evaluating when teleworking is in place? And I think these are very important issues right now for you to be looking at. So what are some things that you should be tracking? Obviously, you do want to be collecting, just even qualitative, anecdotal information from employees and managers about what's working and what's not working, and also, make sure that you're covering the same type of information from the managers. Some employers do, send out a survey, in this COVID-19 period, on a weekly or twice a month, just to get some quick responses to, what are some issues that people are facing. You definitely want to track the technology problems. Your IT department is going to be critical in that, and it would be great if they could share some FAQs, frequently asked questions, even on a weekly basis, of some questions that have come up repeatedly and what those solutions are. You do want to make sure that you are assessing the impact on productivity for different jobs, different employees. Again, we are not in normal circumstances, but once we do go back to, a post-emergency situation, we do want to have an idea of where teleworking can continue to be practiced and where it may not be feasible. And, I think I've talked about the other points. It's just overall satisfaction with the teleworking experience and the lessons learned. So what's the future after COVID-19? I think we've pointed out that planning now is critical. And please manage your employees' expectations. So be very clear that we are doing this right now for COVID-19, and after this period, we will be maybe looking at teleworking again, and have a policy or guidelines available for continued use with certain criteria and expectations. So, employees don't think that right away, oh, I'm going to be able to do this forever, nor may they want to. There are people who are going to be teleworking and will opt out in the future because they will find it to not be something that is easy for them. You also want to look at improved technology. I know of so many organizations that they didn't have a virtual private network in place, but had to get it very quickly so that employees could be working remotely. I think we're going to see more virtual collaboration, because the more we get used to these video, sharing, video conferencing types of collaboration, the easier it becomes to do some of these when employees are teleworking. The one issue that always comes up in every organization is, oh, we always have to be meeting, and we have needs to be around each other to be able to work at home, and that's why it may not be possible. But I think this period will make a good case about how that collaboration can happen. We'll see probably increased part-time teleworking, more employers embracing the 1 or 2 days a week. And as I mentioned, not everybody is going to want to continue. So these are just some high-level tips. Make sure you have top-level commitment, and make sure you are getting that level of commitment as you're going through teleworking. The planning, selection process are critical. Making sure everyone knows about access, communication, and be flexible. Sometimes having a 1 in the afternoon meeting with an employee may be just the right time, because that's when their children are napping. And given today's externalities, that may be the only solution. Your program has to fit your culture, and no two programs are the same, and we can help you with that. And obviously, we always want to plan for expanding these programs. And it might be after COVID-19, we just have to find out how to now bring back some of the workforce, but yet allow some others to have the flexibility.
Thank you, Elham. I want to take this time to quickly remind everyone to type any questions you have in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Elham, I think you touched on a lot of great topics and really highlighted the need for companies to start adding some structure to their programs. While the transition for many of us was pretty sudden, it's important for employers and managers to start thinking long-term about how they can formalize their programs and really structure it in such a way that they're in the best possible position for success. Now, I want to remind everyone about the 2 resources shown on the screen. The first is the state's website, which has the latest COVID-19 information. And the second is our website. I want to emphasize that we are here to help your company with everything we went over today. So if you have any questions, you need help to develop or formalize a program, or maybe just getting a simple policy or agreement in place, don't hesitate to contact us. Again, there is no cost for companies in Connecticut to use any of our services.